In previous videos, whether on dedicated tutorials or during other paint jobs, we've explored non-metallic metal techniques. Many of you left fantastic comments asking for a deeper dive, specifically into the why behind my non-metallic metal. How do I figure out a highlight placement? And what's the thought process for achieving that metallic look? Well, you asked, and today we are going to see exactly that. Get ready to make your model truly shine on the battlefield without a single metallic paint. Grab your thinking caps and maybe your brushes later, and let's get started. So, the big question is, how do we make a standard paint look like shiny metal? Well, it's all about illusion. We have to carefully play with light, shadow and colors to simulate that metallic sheen. The absolute key concept for all non-metallic metal is contrast. Think about highly polished metal. You see very bright, almost white reflection right next to very dark shadow areas. Recreating that strong difference between light and dark is how we're going to trick the eye. Now, figuring out where to place those lights and shadows is often the trickiest part when you're starting out. If you feel a bit lost, don't worry. It's not the easiest technique to grasp immediately, but trust me, after giving it a few tries, making those placement decisions, it's going to feel much more natural and intuitive. One thing that really helped me learn this was super simple. I'd sketch the basic shapes of armor plates, swords, or whatever I was trying to paint, and then use a pen or a pencil to quickly block in where all these shadows and highlights should go. And speaking of learning, remember that you don't have to start from scratch every time. Especially in the beginning, using references can be incredibly helpful. Find photos of real metal, look at artworks, or check out miniatures painted by artists you admire. Don't hesitate to take inspiration or even copy a specific placement or effect you like. Seriously, there's nothing wrong into copying a paint job as a learning exercise. It removes the hardest part, thinking where everything goes, and lets you focus on the painting technique. Now, as we delve deeper into understanding light and shadows, it's important that you remember that the shape of the object dramatically influences how light interacts with it. A flat plane will reflect light differently than a curved shoulder pad or the sharp edge of a sword. Today we'll focus on this Stormcast Eternal Warrior. This is the perfect model, since it's covered in armor with different shapes. Notice the spherical shoulder and knees, cylindrical arms and legs, and the flatter torso and weapon areas. Crucially, light reflects differently on each shape. Look at these references. A sphere's highlight is usually circular, while cylinders is more linear, wrapping around it. Flat surfaces have broader highlights defined by their angle to the light. As you can see, our non-metallic metal goal is to replicate this. We will use our understanding of these light patterns over spheres, cylinders and flat areas to highlight our Stormcast Eternal's armor, creating a metallic illusion using matte paints. So keeping these shape-specific light behaviors in mind, let's start painting. Now that we have a solid grasp on light and shadows and where to place our highlights based on the shape of what we're painting, another crucial element is our color choices. Think about the character of the metal you want to paint. Are you looking for a rich gold, an aged bronze, or, like in my case, a cool, almost ethereal silver that will harmonize beautifully with the signature bluish tones of the Stormcast Eternals? To achieve this cold silver, I started by mixing three key colors. First, a touch of black, to introduce depth and subtly tone down the overall brightness right from the start. Then basalt grey forms the backbone of our midtone, providing a solid foundation. Finally, steel grey, a distinctly cool light grey, is incorporated to immediately establish that icy silver feel we are after. This initial mix is applied as base coat to all the silver areas, effectively setting the stage for our shadows. Next, I moved on to setting the midtones. I took my initial mix and gently introduced equal parts of sky blue and sky grey. The sky blue adds a subtle coolness and richness, enhancing the silver, while the sky grey lifts the values without losing that cold quality. It's important here to avoid going too light too quickly. This mix was applied initially to around 70% of the silver surfaces. This stage is where we really begin to block out the volumes of the figure, using the paint to define the direction and the main areas where the light would naturally reflect. From here, the process became pretty straightforward. I continued to enhance the highlights by progressively adding more and more sky blue and sky grey to the mix. Crucially, as the colors became brighter, I focused on painting increasingly smaller areas. This layering effect creates the illusion of light intensifying over the most exposed surfaces. In this process, I find also helpful to give a bit more interest to the metal over the wider surfaces. I do so by sketching fine lines on the edges of my highlights, giving the idea of polished metal reflecting the lighting regularly. Now, before jumping into the really bright highlights, I took a moment to smoothen out the transition between the layers and to further enhance that cool silver tone. For this, I used deep sky blue, thinned down to a water-like glaze consistency. This diluted paint was then carefully applied over all the transition areas. Remember, whenever you're working with thin paints like for this NMM, and especially with glazes, the golden rule is to always unload your brushes over a paper towel or your hand before applying it to the miniature. This prevents those blob of paints that can ruin all your previous smooth transitions. After this point, I'm not going to highlight the legs as much as the top half, except for a small glint on the knees. This is done on purpose. It sells the effect of the light shining from above, hitting more directly the top parts of the armor while leaving the lower ones more in the shadows. This way we are going to add a touch of realism to our paint job. Once the glaze was dry, I added a touch of ice yellow to the mix and started highlighting only the most raised areas. I use ice yellow because it's not going to immediately desaturate my colors, allowing me to keep the pure white only for the extreme highlights. As with all the previous layers, I kept my paints very diluted and runny. This thin consistency is key for controlling the intensity of the highlights and allowing the transparency of the paints to create those smooth, gradual transitions, avoiding harsh lines of color that will break the illusion. After applying this layer, the final step for the main silver areas was to boost the highlights of the brightest spots to an almost pure white. I added a tiny amount of white to my existing light mix and carefully painted these pinpoint reflections. This creates that essential strong contrast between the darkest shadows and the brightest highlights, which is fundamental to making that NMM effect convincing. Now, if you look at the spear blade, you'll notice that I've gone a bit brighter with the highlights compared to the rest of the armor. First reason, I want that edge to look super sharp and shiny. Second, I plan to give it a deep blue glaze, which will help it stand out from the rest of the armor. Finally, if you want to add a touch of realism and visual pop, you can add a few dots of pure white to the brightest areas as a final flourish. And with that, you should have a rich NMM effect. In conclusion, NMM is one of those techniques that everyone talks about. And let's be honest, it can be a bit of a beast to master. But hey, that shouldn't scare you off from giving it a go. Seriously, the worst that can happen is that you can grab your spray can and press the reset button if you're not happy with the final result. But the cool thing is that every try, even if it's not perfect, is going to teach you something and make you a better painter. So don't get too hung up on trying to make that shoulder pad or that tiny detail absolutely perfect right away. Instead, play around, experiment and try to get the feel for the bigger picture, how light interacts with various shapes and various elements, how the colors works together. Nail down those fundamentals like volumes, light, colors, and you'll be surprised of how quickly you'll start laying down some awesome NMM, almost without even realizing it. With today's video, I really hope I've managed to shine a bit more light, pun intended, over the world of NMM and answered some of your great questions. But hey, if you've still got questions swirling around your head or just simply want to share your thoughts and how you tackle this technique, Jump in the comments down below and let me know, I'd love to hear from you. And if you like this video and haven't already, a like and a subscribe would be super appreciated. Also, a massive thank you to everyone that's already supporting the channel. You guys are the best. And as always, until our next painting adventure, keep pushing those boundaries, moving forward into this big minis world.